or not your metaphor, the situation of like touching elbows, just the barest touch in there. So the thing about skeptical, one side of the skeptical interpretation is we're all islands because we're separated by this huge thing. But what we're separated by is this connection called a relationship, right? And a relationship, that's the whole point of relativity, is that everything is really these relationships. So it's like, you know, it's a tube or a conduit or just a wire. It's a connection between its two ends, right? Or it's two ends, or just it's two ends, right? And we're an end, so it seems like it's a space, but maybe we're just at either end of one physical thing. That's another way of looking at it. So one way or another, I think it's pretty clear that we are connected, and so there isn't even really an issue of the disconnection of people. We're physically entangled, and no one way or another about it. We share facts in common, and it's unavoidable, and it's fortunate, and philosophically, that's a big deal to think that. But it seems, and basically you went through why that's the case, and I think that's what relativity philosophically really is that it's relationships. I'm not a big fan of string theory in physics, and I think it's just been defeated by the Large Hadron Collider, but this metaphor that there's these little segments of a relationship, and what seems like the particle, the thing itself is really just other ends of the relationship. And when the illusion of it being a thing in itself gets really, really strong, is the fact that this end is connected to other things. It's connected to so many things that there's a web of relationships going into this one point. It sure makes it look like a thing. I mean, if you drew that, a whole web of just a million interconnected relationships, when there's a little center where lots of relationships come in, you're going to see those thicknesses. They're going to look like things, even though they're just made out of all these strings. So yeah, the real situation that we're ready to work from is assuming that's the case. And how does everything work when that's the case? And that's the thing about rugged individualism. I used to think of myself that way, and I still think of myself the same way, but I wouldn't use the word rugged individualism. Unlike some other words like libertarian, which I think are worth having my own definition and interpretation. I've been fighting for that word. The rugged individualism is, look, I got tennis shoes. I like the ability to buy tennis shoes. Hundreds of people that mined things and all kind, the rubber and the cloth and everything that went into that is hundreds of people, and that's great. I think they should get a living wage, and there's problems that, like that they don't. But just the bare fact that we're all cooperating, it changes the definition of rugged individualism. Now I'm way off topic because I was just talking about, I think we can claim, since you and I agree, I believe, I'm saying our position could claim that, it's totally proven that, yes, you're communicating through a real conduit. Now the information goes through there. Now there's noise, entropy, and distortion of the image. Yeah, but it still goes through there. That's why that's my illusion it exists thing, actually, is that, you've got a phenomena. Right away, there's a phenomenon. That's information. What's the signal and what's the noise? Well, there's ways to characterize which is signal and which is noise, and, basically statistical methods. And, there's various ways to pin down the details in any of the systems that you might want to use. So it's free will to decide which one, or some other kind of a system. And when it comes to, how isolated are we in our own reality? Yeah, not very. where there's these nest of relationships, and where they cluster, and there's these centralized peers. You know, that's the living things. So, okay. Yeah, I didn't say that as succinctly as I was hoping, but whatever. Okay, cheers. I just finished working and thought, I'm going to make a video like I would have used to just right away. So, I don't know, that could have been a 2-second thing, right? Because really what I was thinking that I would then just extemporaneously talked on and asterisked and parenthesized within was that I felt you were claiming, isn't it possible, you know, you have a physical connection in both people feeling their elbows touching, you know, isn't that like reaching outside of the mind for information in a degree? But you didn't put it that way. You were maybe careful not to put it that way. Maybe I'm projecting. I would be careful not to put it that way because there's this other way of putting it. You don't reach outside your mind, but you're on the end of this tube that connects the whole separation, right? Like a fiber optic. That's the metaphor I want to use. So it's like a fiber optic, right? And it distorts a little bit, and it's, you know, it doesn't just take an image, the light bounces all over, so there's all kinds of distortion and noise and whatever, depending how that works in the particular kind of connection, which is just how the communication is encoded. But if it's encoded through neurons and photons and, you know, pressure cells and the physics, that means it's a physical connection. So it's, you know, it's a legitimate connection all the way with another person's mind. Right? So, so I agree with you on that, if I'm right that that's what you were saying. And then furthermore, I think that our philosophical position, not since we share it, something similar, it does not have to worry about where the bulk of the curve is on where everybody else believes, that it is obviously just by definition of what we mean by physical, a physical connection, and as real as any other physical thing, right? And you could say the whole world is a dream, and it's equally as important whether or not you go swimming when the surf's too big, or you jump off a cliff that's too tall, too high. You know, whether you're in a dream or not, or the Matrix, these have the same consequence, which is the negative consequence and the reason we don't do them. So I think it would be good to do philosophy, and I've been trying to, but in, you know, different terms, but I think very similar, do philosophy from that point of view. Right? The connections are such that however you define real, all the ways of defining reality by all the different dogmatists that have a metaphysical absolute definition for it, they all fit into whatever counts as a real connection, connecting you to other physical things. Now, true, we grant each other the sentience because it appears to be the case, but then again, all of these relationships, for example, the similarity between our DNA and the way our bodies work, you know, they all point towards assuming that, yeah, there's these other real beings. But even if they're just not, and everybody else is an automaton and it's a solipsistic universe, there's still a connection to whatever that thing that looks like it has a sentient life, right? So I do think there's some of the limits on what the skepticism, the basic solipsistic argument, like I've always said, I had a solipsistic epistemology, what it argues for, you know, there is this limit of, okay, as far as granting agency to other people, it makes sense to do that. I think you're forced to do that, but the epistemology is that, yeah, you can't really know that. But you have more reason to believe that's the case than you have to believe it's not the case. Right? There's more evidence that we all look similar enough that we're all having the same experience. You know, I watch myself getting emotional in a mirror. Looks a lot like watching my cousin get emotional just right there. So the similarities you know, are the justification for, well, of course. And I wouldn't say it's a leap of faith, but it is sort of like um, an optional proposition, and really kind of the foundation of broad morality, that you make it like it's imperative that you make that by whatever reason. And one way to do that, if you're thinking you're all strict and realistic, is by remembering that you do have these relationships, and if everybody else was a figment of your imagination, again, it doesn't change the material consequences, the consequences that matter to you about those relationships, which again makes it ludicrous to, well, I have to treat them as if they're sentient like myself, but I don't really know. Well, if you have to treat something like it's sentient, then you basically de facto through your actions, believe they're sentient. And this is all justified because these relationships, are just trivially real. Like, that's a great example you used, because it's very direct. Just a touch on the elbow, and also that something like that is so subtle, and yet it's one of these things that's very conscious. You notice it. It'll be like, you notice it because your brain does a sort of peripheral vision processing and things like that, like there's something there. And so basically making philosophy from that sort of fact is what I consider, that's what I mean by philosophical relativism. All right, cheers. Geez, this was way